This is the Open University.
Hello, my eager beavers, and welcome back to the Open University, where we're in Paris. We're broadcasting to you from the Place d'Aligre, which is where my girlfriend's flat is. And I'm sort of shuttling between Berlin and Paris at the moment, spending 10 to 15 days each month in the Parisian, in the 12th arrondissement, in fact. I'm going to show you what it looks like out the window, because I have two iPhones now. I've really splashed out. It's actually a sort of flea market directly outside, and it's a kind of paradise for me because I love, as you probably know, I love old books and old clothes, and we have a branch of Gary Sol outside. I'm gonna take you out and show you actually. Here we are. This is the Place d'Aligre, and they're selling old French books on tables there. Here's a vegetable market, fruit and veg, seagulls, pigeons. So some fantastic old books to be found down there, exactly the kind of thing I usually buy wherever I am. Fruit and vegetable, and there's a weird kind of slightly fascist appliqué art thing in the middle there of a CRS policeman with La Marianne, the symbol of France. Just round the corner there's a branch of Gary Sol, which is my favourite second-hand shop. And so it's an ideal location for me to be because, I, as you probably know, I live for second-hand books and clothes. That's my favourite thing to acquire. Paris has figured quite large in my life, as you may know. I lived here in the 90s. Okay, I'm going to go through my life talking about the influence of Paris, this city, on me. I'm known, I think even my Wikipedia entry says that I'm a Francophile. My songs have been influenced by France and by French chanson, the French songwriting tradition. But it all starts, I think, with my mother's obsession with France. My mother, I sometimes think of her as a little bit like Miss Jean Brodie, who had an obsession with Rome and with Florence and with Italy, and with Mussolini, unfortunately. My mother's kind of like that with Paris. She really, she came from a very small town in the west of Scotland, in the Campsie Hills, called Blainfield. Although before that she'd been in Prestwick. But Paris was obviously La Ville des Lumières, the city of the great philosophers and the Enlightenment, and just of a lot of lights, a lot of brilliance, a lot of illumination in her life. So in the 50s, I think starting in 1954, she came to France to do babysitting. She was a nanny here, and she worked for someone she called La Comtesse, some sort of family who claimed to be old French aristocrats who'd escaped the revolution. And they lived, first of all, in the sort of chateau in the countryside, but then they were in Paris, or my mother was in Paris, in the Rue de Grenelle on the left bank, in the late 50s. So really the time of existentialism of, the de Magot and Sartre and de Beauvoir sitting out there sipping whatever they were having, holding court on the left bank there, and the beat writers were there, and not that my mother was hanging out with these people. She lived on the same street as Françoise Sagan, who wrote Bonjour Tristesse, but didn't meet her. She knew of her books, though. Obviously, Bonjour Tristesse had been a big hit, and Françoise Sagan was already well known. I didn't come here till, I guess when I was a baby we came briefly to Paris. I don't remember that at all. We came on the ferry. Then we would come on various family holidays to France. We were in Montpellier. My dad was doing some kind of English language summer school in Montpellier in 1969. We would always come through Paris. But it wasn't really a place I either knew well or felt at home in until, I guess, I started playing shows here when I was Momus in the 80s, and then when the great coming together of Europe happened, that was very, very important. The thing which Britain is now untying, this alliance, this alliance between Britain and the rest of Europe, freedom of movement, the lifting of the visas regime, the fact that you could live and work anywhere, was fantastically important to me. I had already kind of come to a hiatus in my music career in London. Before that, I'd felt I'd really wanted to go and live in Berlin, also in Paris, maybe in Madrid. Some European capital would have been a great place to live in the 80s, as Nick Cave and people did. But I think I really... It became so much more possible and in fact necessary because I ran away with my young wife to live in Paris, and we'd created a bit of a stink in London with her family and her relatives not being really into the marriage. So we eloped essentially and came to live in Paris, and we had a Scottish tabloid newspaper followed us and splashed us all over the front pages. In fact, that was how I financed my first apartment in Paris, which was on the Rue Colincourt, and it was I always lived in the 18th arrondissement, up by Sacré-Cœur, my second apartment. After a year in this rather grand maîtresse apartment, someone's mistress probably lived in this place. It had chandeliers, and it was like a garçonnière, I think you call it, on two levels, kind of with lots of bookshelves and chandeliers and carrelage and stuff. But then we moved up the hill to the Place du Théâtre, which is the sort of fake Disney-esque artist square where everyone's trying to act as if it was still 1910, but in fact they're painting as if it were 1810. They're just doing portraits of the tourists, essentially. Let me just show you, this is the sweater I'm wearing right now is actually from Guérisol, just around the corner here. These sweaters are like €2 each in Guérisol. This is my latest one, though. Actually, this is not from Guérisol. This one was from a second-hand shop on the Rue de Monge, across at the University District on the left bank, and this was €4, but it's very, it's like a whole tropical sea that you carry around on your chest, isn't it? I love these things. Paris is more expensive than Berlin for things like food. You know, a loaf of bread, a not very good loaf of bread, costs you €4 here. Organic, inverted commas, bread does. And goes stale after a day and is flimsy and light, you know, whereas the Berlin bread is really substantial and you can live on German bread. And same with beer. The beer here is not great and it's not cheap either. But that aside, I think it's a good axis, if I can coin a phrase, a good axis within Europe. And I don't like flying. It just makes me a bit het up and nervous. And it's been very stormy this spring, so I didn't want to get up in the wind like that. So what I do is I take the train, which is like a good 8-9 hour trip, but you can break it in Frankfurt, you know. And I went this last time to the Oxfam shop in Frankfurt and bought some German books, and then had an hour or so between trains. But I guess it's just I feel very European. I've always felt very European. I'm absolutely outraged by the whole Brexit thing. Thank God it's being postponed. Hope it will just be quietly swept under the carpet, because it's going to be a disaster for Britain. It's also potentially a disaster for me. The way I live is completely tied up with freedom of movement and with the beauty of Europe and the fascination of Europe. So okay, I was living here from 94 till early 97, I guess I left. Moved back to London because of the promise of, you know, kind of the East End of London getting creative and hip, the young British artists, Tony Blair coming to power. There was a little glimpse of what seemed like hope at the time. So I had the last 3 years of the 20th century in London, and then I moved to New York. And since moving to New York in early 2000, I haven't lived in Britain at all. I've either been in Berlin or in Paris, or in Japan. And when I lived in Tokyo and moved back to Europe in 2002, the end of 2002, initially I thought I wanted to go back to Paris, but I felt it was kind of haunted by memories of my marriage in Paris, because that had we got divorced. I mean, we lived together for 2 years essentially in Paris, and had a good time and everything. But then things didn't work out so well. We quarrelled a lot, and so I moved back to London at that point. And I guess coming here in 2002, it was just a little bit too soon. So what I did was moved to Berlin, and that was like a blank canvas. This time, I feel more like that about Berlin because I've already been in Berlin, and so I'm kind of not really interacting with Berlin in the way I would have done 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I've lived in Berlin from 2003 till 2010 before moving to Osaka. And that was a very happy, sociable time where there was a whole group of us, kind of people who were connected to the art school, who were studying art and context at the UDK, and who were Japanese or affiliated with Japanese communities in Berlin. So that was a really nice sort of little time for me. I felt very connected. This time I've just been either making music or writing since getting back last year, the middle of last year. I'm enjoying my apartment in Berlin, but I'm not going out very much, and I'm not really making new friends, particularly. So Paris is really where I kind of feel more sociable. I have a fantastic life here with my girlfriend. I mean, this last weekend we went out and we went to the Palais de Tokyo, which is a sort of Bobo contemporary art center. Bobo is bourgeois bohemian. Paris, I don't know, the atmosphere is quite strange just now in Paris. There's a lot of obviously the Gilets jaunes are a very obvious presence. They were smashing things up on the Champs-Élysées this weekend, which is just a few streets away from the Palais de Tokyo. You wouldn't have known anything was happening if you were down by the river with the people on their trottinettes, the little electric scooters. I now take these electric scooters everywhere I go. It's really such a buzz. It's funny because that reminds me of my period in New York. I lived in New York after 2000 and bought a little Razor scooter, just a kick scooter, no motor or anything. And me and Shizu, my girlfriend at the time, we went everywhere on these little kick scooters around New York. And they're amazingly versatile. You could just sling them over your shoulder when you weren't using them. Now, the versions here in Paris, they're bigger, the big green Lime scooters, and you activate them with an application. They're quite expensive. They're sort of in between the price of the metro and the price of a taxi. For me to go from here to the Palais Royal, for instance, where my favorite cafe is located, that's the Café Kitsune, it costs about €5. So I'm kind of travelling around mostly going through Le Marais, which is the gay stroke Jewish area and very touristy, with a lot of chic boutiques and things. Paris is weird because you really do sense inequality. You sense real poverty amongst a lot of people. A lot of people are living homeless on this square, or selling clothes on blankets on the street or whatever. There is this poverty. There's also the fantastically rich areas around the Ritz or wherever it is, the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, all the luxury stores there, and of course all the Chinese tourists coming to keep those stores in business, the Repetto shoes store, whatever, very high quality luxury goods. And this sense of a very uneasy tension, a neoliberal kind of high Gini coefficient sense of the Gilets jaunes. I don't really have much sympathy with the Gilets jaunes. It's a populist movement which is simply going to aid the National Front and the right, it seems to me. They're agitating for Frexit, and they have a whole panoply of unrelated things. They started because of protests about fuel prices. Diesel was being charged. There was Macron put an eco tax onto diesel fuel to help the environment, which is very, very necessary. We're polluting horribly, and global warming, etc., etc. We need to. I think we should just ban cars altogether. People would be much healthier, carrying things, riding bicycles, walking. Ban the fuckers, the horrible things which are ruining everything. But there was a protest because people in the countryside, in the provinces, and France is very split between the metropolitan and the rural areas, totally different lifestyles and different cultures. These people who need their cars because they live in the countryside got very angry about that and started coming in on weekends. It's a sort of commuter revolution, very unlike the May 68 thing, which was students from the universities saying, we want to own the future. We want, a little bit what's happening with the environmental protests we saw on Friday. Young people saying, don't screw up the world for us. We have to live in it. Let us determine the future. Don't be a gerontocracy. Don't just let stupid old people like Trump decide it doesn't matter what happens in the future because they won't be around. So even just on the boulevard down here, there's a thing called the Coulée Verte, which is a kind of green walkway, a bit like the High Line in New York or the Solio in Seoul, the sort of elevated walkway where you can walk and look at the blossom and stuff and go quite far actually towards Vincennes, is it? But then just down on the boulevard, I did see some these angry wasps with their yellow jackets having confrontations with the police. And this thing I showed you down there in the square, kind of paper commentary, which has been put like graffiti on the side of the building there, it's showing a policeman confronting the proud spirit of Marianne. So, as Marine Le Pen, the fascist, the National Front leader, often does, she takes these symbols of Le Marianne and Joan of Arc. They become nationalist symbols, a bit like King Arthur in Britain. They become symbols of the French race's inherent blah, 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 whatever it is, the pride or whatever. So I very much resist this movement. I see it, I lump it in with the populisms elsewhere. Obviously there are populisms of the left here also, and there's socialism, but it's not so visible. The Gilets jaunes is the most visible example of that, and it's being crushed fairly mercilessly by Macron and his neoliberal stormtroopers. So there is a sense of, in Berlin this is a kind of semi-permanent thing where you have anti-capitalist demonstrations and you have squatters and all the rest of it, but here I think it's not always happening here. The French do like having big protest marches and things, and they do like smashing windows occasionally, but here it's become more of like a permanent opposition, and they're allying themselves with the Five Star Movement in Italy and all the rest of it, to the fury of the French diplomatic community. So anyway, you can read the papers and get this background yourself. But I do sense it when I'm trottinetting around. You can be a tourist and you can feel at home with the Asians. There's a huge number of Asian tourists here, Japanese and Chinese, in the central areas. But then this area is a bit more populaire. It's a bit more working class. Actually, a little pocket of working class life. This flat is very small. Typically, you get half as much food for the same price as you would in Berlin. You get half as much living space in Paris as you do in Berlin. It's a very dense city where it's very desirable to live in the centre. This is pretty central. So this place is costing €900 a month. And it's only about, 25 metres squared, but it's a fantastic location. Everything works really well, the hot water, the internet's very fast, and so it's a great place for me to be based. I'm so happy. My girlfriend is such a fantastic, is great fun to be with, and a fantastic person. She works, she's out at work just now, working in the garments industry, a little way out of town, so she has to commute about an hour to get there. But we see each other in the evenings and weekends, and yes, it's a bipolar kind of life. I've always been happy with the bipolar situation, whether it's living in Osaka half the year, in Europe the other half. Actually, it was more like 8 months in Japan to 4 months in Europe, sort of shuttling around, usually playing concerts or whatever. I'm not doing so many concerts just now because I'm still writing this enormous book, my memoir, which is called Niche. And so I'm sitting here. I don't work as well in Paris as I do in Berlin, so it's a little bit slower here. I don't have my library. That's very important for the particular approach I've taken to this book, which is to write sections of my life in the voices of other people, so it's pastiche. So that requires access to books. Of course, I have the market here, and I can always buy books. Let's just look at the books I've got here. I brought Joe Orton's diary to read on the train. I think Joe Orton will have to make an appearance. Malcolm Lowry, Dark as the Grave Wherein My Friend Is Laid. I found a fantastic bookshop called San Francisco Books, which is second-hand English books here in Paris, and that's where I got all these books the other day. Kafka, the Penal Colony. That's actually a French book that I got elsewhere. Ronald Furbank. I'm not even going to read the title of this because it's an unacceptable word these days. But yes, Valmouth and the Eccentricities of Cardinal Pirelli, and an other short novel, and very camp, extremely camp Ronald Furbank. He was a big influence on Joe Orton as well. Joseph Conrad Victory. I bought this several times, and I think I lost it in the post from Myanmar or something, and I never got to the end of it. But I found it a very gripping book, actually, Victory, because it's about an old ship captain and his a dancing girl. He tries to retreat to an island and live with her, but he's got an enemy who's tracking them down. So I wanted to see what happened in the end. Then I got some classical books, Plautus, The Rope and Other Plays. Plautus is sort of comedy, a comic Roman playwright who provided a lot of plots later reused, recycled by Shakespeare. And I've never actually read Plautus, so that should be amusing. Petronius the Satyricon, I have read that. That's the earliest known Roman novel describing, famously, Trimalchio's Banquet, describing a sort of decadent Roman dinner party. My friend Tug lives quite close to here as well. He's got a new flat, actually, an amazing flat with lots of rooms for a change, because he's been living in like 2 rooms for most of his life. Beautiful. So I was there for dinner the other day. My other friend here is Tomoko Sauvage, who's a musician making water music with Chinese bowls. Plato, Protagoras, and Meno. This was referred to in the lecture I gave a few months ago called Brothers. My brother gave a lecture on the story of Prometheus and Epimetheus, 2 brothers, which is actually referenced in this Protagoras by Plato. And I said by mistake Pythagoras. Okay, sorry guys. I now have the text, I can actually read it. So I think I'm going back a week yesterday, back to Berlin on the train, and I will have a lot of reading matter in my suitcase from which to choose for those 8 hours to while away the time. I feel like I haven't really said very much about this wonderful city. What could I say about it? Obviously, Paris has always... It's kind of set the intellectual agenda for me, because I always was interested in what Bataille and people like that had to say, the Acéphale group. Obviously the songwriters like Jacques Brel, Serge Gainsbourg are very present here, and I feel I can open Libération, the paper. I subscribe digitally to Libération, so I feuilleton, I leaf through the PDF of Libération, and I find an article by Olivier Lam, who's a friend of mine, about Japanese ambient music, for instance, and I just feel this wouldn't be in The Guardian. You get some stupid cultural commentary by that idiot Jonathan Jones, which I don't even read because it would infuriate me too much. Here in Paris, I feel much more intellectually on the same page as them. I know the kind of culture, the cultural references. I watch Arte. I project onto the ceiling with my projector Arte documentaries in the evening. And when I lived here before, I think I was more kind of Anglo-centric, and I was watching MTV, The Real World, the early 90s, watching a lot of music videos and things. And that whole culture has really kind of died, not just for me, but for the world, I think. We no longer sit around watching music videos on MTV. We might watch a few on YouTube, but there isn't that sense of that being a vital culture anymore. The weird thing for me is that the vital culture is the dead culture of these archives, which are on sale right outside my window. The books, I'm in paradise the moment I step outside there and look at what they have on the tables. I really am. Or buy the old clothes. I mean, the things that excite me tend to be things from the past, the best of the past recycled and recontextualized. And I was talking about Venice in my last vlog, and I suppose Paris, this part of Paris, because it's largely pedestrian here, the market culture, it does feel very Italian. The building over there is kind of, looks like an agora kind of building, or like an Italian market. It's a city which is too dense to be dominated by car traffic, and anyway, it's too tourist, like Venice. It's got this tourist charm which it relies on. Tourism is by far the biggest industry here, so they need to keep it charming. It needs to charm people, this city, and by and large, it does do that. Are there any bad things about Paris that annoy me? I guess people can be brittle and aggressive. There's a certain sense that things are just on the very edge of some kind of hysterical panic all the time, or I don't know, that things could easily tip over into some kind of hellish disorder that the density would simply make worse, because you're really living on top of, for instance, the Gare du Nord. Just a little episode from last time I was here, a couple of weeks ago. I was walking, taking a shortcut, sorry, not the Gare du Nord, the Gare de Lyon, which is really close to here. I took a shortcut through the station, and this mad guy just darted in front of me, and he spat as if he was spitting on my clothes. And I kind of looked down angrily and then looked back at him, and then he just went ballistic and started shouting at me, and then he was following me, shouting very loudly. And these policemen with machine guns came, and they thought I was shouting. So at first they were walking up to me with their machine guns brandished, sort of saying, keep it down, keep it down. Then they realized it was the guy behind me, and then they say to him, keep it down, keep it down. But they don't really ask him who he is or anything. And he continues following me as I leave the station at the back. And then he jumps round. He takes a photograph of me with his cell phone and then walks off. Really strange little episode. And it at the time I was just like, fuck that. I just ignored him totally. And I wasn't scared. But then later it sort of resonated as a weird thing, that there are these weird people in extreme states, and you see them on the metro. I'm avoiding the metro a lot now because of taking electric scooters everywhere, which is a lot more fun. Dangerous in a different way, because it slides around. If there's a wet surface on the road and you go over a manhole cover, for instance, it really slides, it skids easily. And there's just one brake, which is a back wheel brake, so that skids also very easily. You're kind of on the pavements a lot of the time with those things, and dodging around people, and apparently old people get a little unnerved by them, and there have been accidents, obviously. But I'm loving that as a way to see the city, to stay on the surface and see it, and great way to get around. So the weather, I think, for the rest of this week is going to be really nice here. We've got blue sky for the first time in a few days. The winds have been high, but they're going to die down, and it's really wonderful to be here. And I just thought I'd update you. There's no particular conceptualization in this one, just Paris as it has figured in my life, and as it's figuring in my week. I'll be back in Berlin next week, and that's productive. So I kind of think of Berlin as my studio. My apartment there is like my workplace, and then I come here to be a human being and to have fun with my girlfriend, and bloody hell, life is sweet.
Open University.